Thank you. We're back online. Courtesy of the Vice Chairman, are the committee happy with the recommendation to the Executive that effort be put into simplifying the wording of these documents so they can be more readily understood by members? And in particular, I would suggest that a very small task and finish group could be set up, which would actually meet with the officers and make sure that they understand what the concepts are and can agree what sort of wording would transmit that same level of understanding to as many other members as possible. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We will now move on to item 9, which is the General Fund budget for 23-24 and the medium-term financial plan 23-24 to 26-27. Mr. Vickers, who is going to be deputed? Thank you, Rosie. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. In front of you this evening, we have the General Fund budget 23-24 and MTFP for 23-24 for the following 4 years. So in this report, we've detailed some of the major assumptions built into the 23-24 budget. They include a 2.99% increase in Waverley's Band D council tax charge for next financial year, a general inflationary increase to fees and charges, and a 4% increase in the weekly charge for garages. And also in here, it details some of our assumptions around inflation and also mitigation of some of that inflationary cost through some of the targets set corporately, including the commercial target, the business transformation, collaboration and asset management targets. All of these targets and assumptions are detailed in the MTFP document at Annex 1, which is supported by a number of notes. In addition, we have presented the proposed fees and charges at Annex 4, and then the capital programme that is proposed is also here, Annex 5, and finally a reserve document at Annex 6. You will see in here a number of assumptions around funding as well, and we now know that the fair funding review has been delayed a further year, potentially 2. The government have stated that that will be carried out in line with their spending review, and we have included in the report the details of what funding has been provided by the government for next financial year. The majority of this is 1-year funding, with the only definite change for 2 years being council tax increase, which is a 2.99% increase for the following 2 years, which is an increase from the 1.99% provided for previously. I don't propose to go into too much detail unless you want to request any further, but happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Neil.
An odd one here. Talking about garages, which is on page 100. I haven't seen this one come up before, but it seems to me as if we are selling off more and more of the garages which are were intended for the tenants for private occupants. How does that fit with more of these tenants having to park on the road, and how they're going to charge their cars up in the future? Is that, do you understand what I'm getting at there? Thank you.
So, Chairman, the garages tend to be in blocks and there's no electricity provision on them as it stands, so charging is probably a non-starter in that area. The reason the adjustments being made is an accounting adjustment based on legal basis, that the garages as they stand are not part of the Housing Act 85 provision of dwellings, and this is a correction of something that should have been corrected quite some time ago. In that respect, there's a significant liability sitting around those garages because of the nature of their state of repair, that it legally cannot be picked up by the tenants' monies in the ring-fenced HRA. Therefore, it has to fall to general fund in order to correct that. And the correct accounting is that the garages are accounted for in general fund. The actual asset is a corporate asset, as all assets are corporate asset. The HRA ring fence is only the revenue account itself, i.e. the tenant's money's coming in spent on maintenance, repairs and management. So this is a correction of something that we should really have addressed a while ago. But the pressure really came through looking at the state of repair and how they need to be handled going forward, that we actually had to make this adjustment.
Thank you. If I can pick up on that. I was going to ask a question about the garages because I had seen they were being transferred from the HRA to the general fund. In terms of the occupants or the lessees of them, I mean, are they mainly HRA tenants or other people?
It's predominantly, well, there's quite a few empties, but sorry, Candice. So it's 75% private tenants in the garages, those that are tenanted.
Right. I mean, it did occur to me that if you look at the fees and charges, we're not surprisingly putting up most things by inflation, or 9%. I wondered why we were not doing the same to the garages, given they've now moved to the general fund. Do you know the thinking behind keeping it to 4, which is very much the HRA increase for next year?
So it's a combination of there's literally the state of repair of the garages themselves and the amount of money that needs to be spent in them or not spent on them, depending on the condition. And also it's an economic call in terms of not putting off the current tenants by too big an increase so that we end up with more voids.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Edmonds, who's got his hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've only just been allowed into the meeting. The Zoom system went down, so I think I've only been in the meeting now for 4 minutes, the same as applied to Councillor Hyman. If that could be minuted, please. I think also Councillor Neil has made an excellent point about parking on the roads. We really need to look at this in a little more detail. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Hyman, please keep it as brief as you can. You and I have conversed on this, so I'll trust you to follow that advice. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Well, I haven't had the opportunity to speak on the items that I've indicated on, so we're very unhappy about the situation this evening. Basically not allowed to speak. But it seems that on this one, on the garages issue, I'd like to know what income would the general fund receive? Is there anything being assumed that the general fund would receive because it's appropriating the garages from the housing revenue account, which currently has them? I heard what has been said about the liabilities, but I think the intention is to build on the sites, or like as in Ryle Road in my own ward. Obviously these garages were built to go with the council housing, and you know, it's although a lot of tenants can't afford them anymore, because you're looking certainly with some of them from Wagon Yard Car Park in Farnham, you're looking at getting up towards £100 a month now. I think it is that people have to pay. So a lot of them have gone over to being private, but that may not be the situation in future. If if garages hadn't gone up so much over the years, then people would be able to afford them, and they wouldn't have been let to private people. This is an issue where, you know, do we really know, should that be should we be doing this appropriation?
Please do. But you're speaking at my discretion, as you were late. You are not entitled to speak, but I'm happy to let you, providing you help us by being brief. And if you could ask questions rather than simply make statements.
Well, I did ask the question as whether there's a assumption in the budget of an income transfer from general fund to HRA, but also has there been any consultation on the appropriation? The process is going through. I understand that we're being told in the papers that it's happening in April. And we are entitled, I think, to know a bit more about that, because it should go to council. I mean, appropriation always used to go to council.
Allow the officers to answer you. Officers.
Thank you, Chairman. So first of all, the garages are predominantly used as storage, so not for vehicles, the ones that are being tenanted. The garages that are upwards of £100 a month are particularly Wagons Yard in a particular area of Farnham. They're not representative of the rents across the rest of the garage stock. The garages were appropriated through the CFR in the treasury management strategy, that element we've just been discussing. So it was a paper movement on the balance sheet alone. The net revenue stream is £100,000 a year to general fund, of which we will have to start to recognise the liabilities that are sitting there in terms of handling. So the long-term financial position on the garages is pretty much will nullify any income going forward over the next few years. What else is Councilor Hyman? I think I've answered all of them.
Yeah. So we. Okay, so Councillor Hyman, do you have anything further to ask?
Well, I'd like to go further into that, but I think I should take it offline, because that sounds
that sounds a very good idea.
We've had no consultation, I understand, that then, because that didn't get answered. Yeah. And there are a lot of tenants who now are.
Mr. Vickers does have a comment to make, so if you could let him make
a general fund, yeah.
Apologies. The last one was about consultation. This is a legal requirement around the Housing Act itself. There is no need or purpose or use for consultation in this instance. It's not a discretionary thing that can happen. The garages are still available for whoever in the public to rent, not just our own tenants. It's just a correction of where the accounting physically happens within the books. That is all. From a service provision point of view, there is no outward impact on the garages as they stand at the moment, as it is.
Thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Hyman, any other topics you want to ask about?
Not particularly on this item. I'd wanted to speak on previous items that were on the agenda, but may I quickly just mention one that appeared at the beginning? I think it was under item 6.
No, if we have time at the end, we might, but we need to press on. Thank you.
Chairman. So.
Right, other members, any questions or comments? Councillor Hegan.
I'm uncomfortable that we still have a COVID runoff item in the medium-term financial plan that has some chunky numbers in, and from the commentary it seems as if we've just allowed ourselves to morph into accounting for cost of living crisis activity and calling it COVID. I think that's a bad look for the council, because I think generally one hears comments that, you know, COVID is being used as an excuse on an ongoing basis, and I don't think we should fall into that trap.
Sorry, could you clarify that?
If one looks at appendix note A,
Page which, please?
Page 110, there is a number of items in here which are still being attributed to COVID. And I don't think we could honestly put our hands on our hearts now and distinguish in terms of people not using leisure centres as to whether it's really to do with COVID or the fact that one of the first discretionary expenses to go in a cost of living crisis is your gym membership. And I think we're perhaps being lazy in categorising things that are outside our control and bad news and preventing us getting back to where we were that are not genuinely COVID anymore. So I'd cite gym membership perhaps accounting for, a discretionary cutback in expenditure when you look at leisure centres and car parking. I think people's behaviours are going to change because of the cost of living crisis in a way that's going to potentially be indistinguishable from the things that caused problems in COVID. And then if we move down to look at council tax and business rate debt summons charges, I just don't think this is necessarily all still to do with COVID. And then under costs, additional staffing, revenues and housing benefits, the comment actually says that delay in reduction of staffing budgets for revenues and housing benefit administration due to the cost of living service impacts. And I think we should be more diligent in making sure that we don't call genuine problems COVID related when it's actually morphed on to being a symptom of the cost of living crisis.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sent a series of questions on Thursday last to Peter Vickers, and could I just say thank you for the answers to those questions. There are a number of points arising that I will take up offline, but I think the most important point that I would like to understand better are the savings for the collaboration with Guildford Borough Council. And I note that in the figures that we see for 23-24, there is an identified budgetary saving of 202,000, which is probably in excess of what was forecasted out of the £700,000 per annum that we were going to get savings from. But I'd like to better understand what the savings were in this financial year and the last 2 financial years, so that I could convince myself that we really are going to achieve a £700,000 per annum saving going forward beyond 2023-24. But I'll take that offline because I think that gets a bit complicated if we try and do that online. A couple of questions apart from that. Staff vacancies and locum costs, it's not identified as a problem or an uncertainty for the future. I am aware that staff vacancy levels are relatively high and that our locum costs are fairly large. Could you please maybe identify what that is costing this year, for instance, and what you're expecting next year? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is on the new homes bonus. It does seem to go up and down a great deal. In 22-23, that's this year, it's 1.6 million. The year before that, it was under $1 million. This year, it goes down to 642. I know there's uncertainty about whether we'll get it at all in the future, but 1.6 million this year seems to be very high versus the 642 that we're looking at for next year. That's question 2. Question 3 is on the funding guarantee grant. So it's very nice to get an extra £1 million to support the 3% increase in core spending power. Were we expecting to get a figure of that sort, or was that a bit of a surprise? I know it's not in future years, but I would just like to understand a little more about that. Leisure centres, I don't see anywhere in any analysis of the leisure centre income. I know that this suffered a great deal during COVID, but I would just like to see year by year the amounts that we got or didn't get versus what we were expecting and where we are now. I know that there is a new contract which starts in July 2023, so it kind of gets difficult to forecast what that's going to be. But I wonder if we could have, please, more analysis on the leisure centres, since this is a fairly important part of our income. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll just take them from the top down. Vacancy and agency costs. I'm happy to tabulate those on the ledger and circulate to the committee over this next week. The new homes bonus is driven literally by the performance on the council tax base itself. So that's new properties brought into use in the borough within the course of the year. So that's estimated up to mid-October each year. So the figure literally is the same number in pounds terms per property as last year. So it's entirely down to performance in year of new properties coming on.
So it's just a very large number of new homes
It
coming in to
literally
generate one
is.
point, which I presume, but I just wanted to understand that.
Sure. It's growth in tax base. What else are we looking at? The funding guarantee from government. It was a very late announcement from the government. It was not expected at all, and that's the government's response to the cost of living crisis and inflation that we were suffering. And so the government guaranteed us 3% what a spending power guarantee, and quite how they work that out. Well, I don't know. My crystal ball didn't help, to be fair, and we'll never know. But it is a one-off, and we won't be getting it again next year. And the same with the new homes bonus. We didn't. Government's indicated they're not going to pay it. They indicated last year they're not going to pay it, and there's no legacy payments anymore. So we don't plan around it too much because of the level of uncertainty and the value of that grant. And the leisure centres, we will commit to circulating the tabulated numbers as requested.
Thank you. I have Councillor Edmonds with his hand up. Councillor Edmonds.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. One question as regards to the savings. Do the savings accommodate the pension liabilities or what's called pension strain? Because they could be quite significant. Thank you.
Obviously, so I think
Councillor
I saw a
Edmonds.
reduction in the allocation. So I'm going to ask that myself. Has our pension contribution actually declined a little because of rising interest rates?
Yes, so every 3 years we get a triennial review of our pension fund, and that it is for both current members and back funding of members. So they have updated their assumptions according to the latest data. So we will see savings for the next year, and they have provided us forecasts for the following 2 years as well until that next triennial review. So that is a cash saving.
Thank you.
Councillor Heath. Thank you.
I did wonder when you asked your question, Councillor Edmonds, whether you were talking about the collaboration savings, because I think pension strain only arises in the event of a redundancy situation. And I had assumed that the redundancy cost saving that we were, the redundancy costs that we've seen as part of the collaboration savings would include our estimates on pension strain. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So when including the costs of collaboration, which is redundancy, would also include pension strain. I was going to say, I'm just thinking from our current known redundancies that were made, I don't think pension strain was applicable to any of those at Waverley. But if we were to have that, it would be included alongside the redundancy in any business cases.
So it could become transparent in the future.
Yes, it could.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hegan.
I just had a subsidiary question following on from Councillor Martin's questions on leisure centres. I see we've moved into an income position this year of 30,000. Is that as a result of an uptick in the actual use, or is this reflecting the long-awaited share of the insurance settlement that First Leisure were hoping for?
If I may, Chair. So in the 22-23 financial year, we are receiving management fee from Places for Leisure as per our original contract. So that's around £500,000 we are receiving in the current year through that contract. The additional 30,000 that is built in through here is around both inflation and potential for profit share. So there is some additional income built in 23-24 on top of the current management fee. So that's the item in the COVID-19. In prior years, we have been supporting the leisure centres rather than receiving that management fee, but we returned to contract position this financial year as of 1st of April 22.
So are we still keeping our fingers crossed for an insurance payout?
Absolutely. I haven't heard any news recently, however, so I can't give you an update, I'm afraid.
Thank you for that. Just a quick question on that. So are you saying that the amount of income we'll receive for 22-23 is actually 530,000?
Roughly that 500,000 I quoted is a number off the top of my head, but yes, it would be on top of.
And am I right, if this is going forward a bit, but in paragraph 10.3 on page 99 and 100, there is a warning that we fully expect that will actually go negative, if you like, again, when the new contract starts, because of the need in effect to be starting from a rather different sheet of paper, given the higher energy costs associated with leisure centres. Is that a fair comment?
So with the leisure centres, yes, so we've got a new contract from July, and the new contract, we are still in conversation with the bidders, so we can't release any of those details. However, we are expecting an income in next financial year, but it will be decreased, which is why you see the reduction. The energy costs remains a risk in the current financial year. However, we are moving to a energy benchmarking scheme with the new contract, so that will be costed in for the first year and then reviewed thereafter.
Thank you. So I think things probably are changing, aren't they? That in up to the present financial year, the risk lies with the contractor, whereas in the next financial year, we may well have to share some ourselves. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? I've got my own list of questions. So Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Could I just ask a question on page 119, which is the Annex 2? Two questions. Firstly, on the increase in number of houses that we have, how much of the council tax in 2023-24 that I see is got at from the increase in the number of houses that we have? Is that most of the 231,000 in the council tax adjustments, or is there another figure? We've got a council tax of 11,232,335, an increase of 63,000, but I'm just looking for where is the figure for the increase in the number of houses that we have. I note, for instance, when we go to page 118 under the contracts on waste, it mentions that we've got a £578,000 increase, and it says that that's mostly to do with the number of house numbers going up. If there's that much going up on that side, I'd expect to see something fairly substantial on the revenue side from the same number of increased houses. That's question number one. Question number two is on the 1 million funding guarantee grant that we got from the government. Without that, the figure would have had to, our spending figure would have been 15,677,413. Presumably it would be about £1 million less than that. Where has the £1 million gone into in the service costs? You know, what would have been the situation without that £1 million, and where's that £1 million gone? Has it gone into reserves, or has it gone into more expenditure than we would have had otherwise? So what's happened to it? Because it's a bonus, as it were, and I'm very interested to know where it's gone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Officers.
So if I can go back to the tax increase to start with. So the tax increase is part of that 11,232. So that 63,000 growth is the element that is an increase in taxable dwellings within the borough in year. So normally that hovers around a £50,000 increase. So there is a slightly more increase than we would normally expect there. Obviously, we only collect and keep around 10% of that council tax. So Surrey and the parishes and police will also be benefiting from that increase in households in the area. The item regarding the extra £1 million of funding guarantee. So you will see, and I'm just trying to locate it. There are an increase for property maintenance fund in the Annex 1 Note C. There is the growth in the development management, and the local plan review are all using up a element of that 1 million alongside other items that are identified throughout the report, but they're the major growth items that are effectively applying that additional £1 million growth.
Chairman, if I may, without that million, we would have been a little stretched, therefore, would we not?
We were in a deficit position before the funding settlement was announced.
Okay, just also relating then to page 118 on the waste contract, the additional £578,000 in 23-24. I guess most of that is the 5 to 9% increase. I mean, presumably that the contract does specify CPI, I assume, but it also mentions the increase in the house numbers. I just wonder how much of that is the increase in house numbers.
You're correct, that is linked to the CPI on the contract. That's based on March CPI. So we've taken assumption at this stage. This does include house number increases. I couldn't tell you the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm happy to circulate that afterwards.
Thank you. Right. If I can turn to page 93. I was interested in paragraph 4.3, one bullet point, second one down from the top of the page 93, demonstrate that sufficient resources will be available to meet Waverley's objectives and priorities, particularly in the delivery of value for money. And I was just wondering what you were getting at there, because I'm not quite clear how having adequate resources actually helps you in delivery of value for money. If anything, you'd have thought that when you're under pressure, you'd be more keen to look for value for money than when you've got surplus income. Not that we often have that. So could you explain what point is being made there?
Chairman, it literally is pointing out that it is a corporate objective to specifically focus on value for money. And therefore we're making sure resources are there to do that. It's also, value for money is also very key in delivering the savings targets within the MTFP itself.
If I may, I mean, I would sort of, that's a very good point, but why not give it its own bullet points, just to emphasize on its own that it's one of our key concerns with everything that we do. View 7.4, we refer to government funding, which is perfectly accurate, but I think we should all bear in mind that, of course, it comes from other taxpayers. Sadly, this country has no sovereign wealth fund, unlike Norway. So basically anything we get has to come from someone else. I hope we're not yet in the business of borrowing to fund current government expenditure. If I go on to 7.7, which is on page 96, this is, again, trying to improve the clarity of this document, which is important and extremely interesting and well worth reading in detail. We say that Waverley's budget suffers from a structural deficit in Waverley's budget arising from service cost inflation compared to additional income from council tax. Is it not right to add and other sources of income, because they too are affected by the fact that they're limited by government controls? I think that would be helpful. And then I was fascinated to see at the bottom of that paragraph, as government funding has fallen away, the council has reluctantly become increasingly reliant upon council tax funding and independent income, including fees and charges. And I do actually slightly cavil at the word reluctantly. If we could become independent, we would have far less volatility. So I'm not sure it's really the sort of word that should be in there, but that's just a personal view. And then if we move on to page 98, I think this has been answered. We've already, and it's going to be a recommendation, which I know the Vice Chairman is writing down. We'd like to see a proper breakdown of the collaboration savings. And it was kindly confirmed that one of the sources of our savings, because Guildford, of course, had a much higher overall JMT or senior management team bill than ourselves, and therefore would actually initially seek to save more than we did for that reason, but we now realize we're not necessarily getting half of every single JMT member's time. So I think that'll come out when we see the full analysis. Yes, in 10.3 we've touched on leisure centres, and I think that tendering process will be extremely important. We are, I think, rightly proud of our leisure centres. Probably quite pleased that we're retreating to 4 rather than 5, with the Edge and Hazelmere going back to Surrey. But one thing which I fear we have to be prepared to think about, at least, is whether we can afford to provide swimming pools, which are hugely expensive, and I'm sure will play their part in the discussions with the tenderers. Now, on page 101, there's a reference I'd be grateful for some clarity on, which is the reference to the business rates equalisation reserve. And there's a statement there that, find it, that it was set up several years ago by former councillor Mike Band, who was the portfolio holder. And my understanding that it was really set up solely to deal with the costs of appeals from business rate payers, and we would be left with the obligation to meet any repayments. But you've added in 2 other bullet points: the risks of the government cutting the retained business rate funding to Waverley, and declining rateable values also reducing retained funding. Is it just more accurate to say we have added these as perfectly proper reasons for having or maintaining that reserve? But were they actually the original ones? I don't know whether Mr. Vickers can remember from when he joined us.
Chair, they've actually been in place, must be 5 years now, in current form, at least. So maybe it's just the way the paragraph's presented that's drawn that attention out differently.
But really, I'm more interested in just knowing whether my history is right. Am I right that it was first set up to deal purely with the appeals problem?
It was before my time, actually. That was 9 years ago when that happened, but it was certainly was there at the time.
Thank you. It's not a matter of huge. One thing on page 13.1, which is on page 102. One of the things which undoubtedly happens during a year is that we have special budget requests, and here, one-off adverse impacts, such as planning appeals, judicial reviews, and I'm sure there are others. Do we have a number for what the total of those is over the past few years? Is that something one can easily find out? Has it been answered? Oh, thank you. I'll spare you answering it again then. Thank you. And one, I'm afraid it is, I think I've said this before, could we look on 13.1, adequacy provisions, the 4th bullet point, investment property voids. This is an increasingly important revenue stream. It can't really mean that, because voids are bad things. So could you please just clarify again, and if that wording needs amending, could we do it next time? So when you refer to investment property voids, what exactly are you referring to? The loss of income or the creation of provisions to deal with the loss of income?
Chair, we'll amend the wording. It was just trying to be short form on a bullet point. Effectively, the investment property income is an important income stream to this council, and voids need to be mitigated. And that's what it's there for.
Could I suggest the investment in a few extra words, and it would make life much easier for us? But thanks. So really what you're saying is that because they impact on our investment property income. Yeah, thank you. I've almost finished. The local plan review, which is on page 112. And also appears on appendix 6. If we can just clarify that the spend in this year and the current year cover the review, which I believe is almost complete, But then the reason for putting in what I imagine are provisions for the 3 next years is that it depends upon the nature of any updates of the plan which will take place. So that is the worst case, and we'd hope we wouldn't have to spend so much money. Thank you.
Yes, so if I can just add to that, yes, so this is adding to the provision. So we currently have a local plan reserve in our balance sheet. This is adding to that reserve, and as always, we hope to spend less than identified here. Where savings can be made, they absolutely will be.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have Councillor Edmonds and Councillor Hyman. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got 2 comments. One about wet leisure centres. Apparently they're becoming, possibly becoming untenable due to heating costs. I know a number of local authorities are considering their ability to sustain them. The planning appeals costs is something I've always looked for. So when it becomes available, I would be more than pleased to have a look at it. And the question is, why are the council taking inflation risk in the contracts?
Officers, I imagine it's very difficult to enter into contracts which don't involve some inflation risk, but perhaps the officers can help.
Yes, I think you're right there, Chair, in that it is a risk that contractors will not take on, and we are having to mitigate that risk with the uncertainty around it, particularly in the current climate. I can't see any of our contractors signing up and covering that themselves. And if we were to put that risk on them, we would see much reduced contract income or increased contract costs where they are mitigating it themselves.
Yeah, sorry, I've been involved in so many contracts. I haven't seen it before. I could understand now why we can't move away from it. We've almost created a situation where we have to accept it. Thank you.
I think just to comment on that, we've had an unprecedented period of almost, certainly 30 years of very low interest rates. And now we've moved into a completely different era. And it's, I think, hardly a surprise that people who want to contract with us are very concerned about the impact on their own bottom line. I'm afraid it's one of life's less good developments over the past three years. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thanks. If I can quickly take you back to page 104, paragraph 17.3. Chairman. Say yes when you're there, if you would.
Carry on anyway.
104, 17.3, it says, in view of the level of awareness amongst members and the action taken to produce Waverley's draft budget. And I was wondering what that actually means. Is that a compliment? Is it saying that we know far more than I think people do? And this is in respect of monitoring and being able to ensure that the savings which are projected do come through, keeping an eye on that side of it, which is obviously, I know you try and keep on top of yourself, Chairman, very much. So I just wondered whether we can have some explanation of that. You did mention yourself, you dipped into 13.1, which is a couple of pages beforehand, at the top of page 102, when you mentioned property voids issue, and which I had mentioned, and there's also, you mentioned the costs of planning appeals, having them and fighting them, and judicial reviews. And in that respect, Chairman, in tomorrow night's papers for the services ONS, there's confirmation from Natural England that we have to have a strategic approach in order to address in combination effects on the Wealden Heaths. They accept that what they've been doing with the Hindhead concept statement and whatever isn't adequate. It doesn't meet the law, and we're going to have to address this. And if we were to, as a council, do what the law says, and that would give us the decision, as long as our decisions are not unreasonable, as you'll appreciate, Wednesbury unreasonableness, then we won't have appeals and we won't have costs. A very easy way of saving money on that. It would be offset slightly, but of course by a loss of planning income in the short term, but wouldn't have to be in the longer term once we've got our ducks in a row. But that's an issue which I'll have to take outside. But tomorrow night's meeting
Could
for
we
the
focus on tonight's agenda?
well,
please?
that is the issue is of saving money, and there's a big area where we can save money if we do that for all the things that come along with it, and it hasn't been obviously considered at all within this document. So they'll stop at that point. Thanks.
Thank you. Right. We've had a fairly good wade through the document. Has anyone got any more questions or comments they would like to make?
I was going to say, can we clarify if we're taking anything forward to accept, like running through the COVID runoff? I think we should change the language, ask the exec to consider changing the language. I think these are just things we've asked to come through to us.
I think the two recommendations, one will be to ask for attention to be paid to whether it's appropriate to keep on referring to the COVID runoff. And the second is a detailed breakdown of the collaboration savings. Is the committee happy for those to go forward as recommendations of the general fund budget?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. We'll now move on to.
Apart from that,
Do we have any other comments to make? And I'm happy to recommend.
Chairman, sorry, Chairman. Yeah, I just thought in terms of fees and charges, has the committee, is the committee satisfied with the level of fees and charges, given that we shouldn't be reacting to inflation, we actually drive inflation. So whatever we want next year's inflation to be, then we should be increasing things by less than that. We are putting some of these up taxi badges 16%.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. You're not a member of this committee. I've heard.
No, I was just asking whether the committee was satisfied with the level, because I do think.
Would you please leave it there?
Thank you.
I've heard nothing from the rest of the committee who showing any interest in making recommendations on that point. I've made the point for taking away that I was wondering why we didn't increase the garage rents by the 9% we're using for most general fund fees and charges. I was told in part it's because the quality of the garages is not good enough. I'm content with that as an answer. I've mentioned the two recommendations. Are there any others members would like to bring forward? And if not, are we happy with those, and otherwise to recommend that the budget is approved?
Chairman, I don't think we approve a budget, do we? We just
we recommend that it goes to the executive. Yes, thank you. No, other people have to do that. Might be an improvement if this committee approved the budget, but it's not in the Constitution.
I'm sure Councillor Follows would have leapt upon that.
We move on to item 10, which is the Housing Revenue Account Business Plan, Revenue Budget and Capital Programme 23-24. Officers, Candice, are you looking after that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in front of you, you have the HRA Business Plan and Capital Programmes. So the business plan spans 30 years, and we also have a capital programme that spans 10 years included in these annexes. So there are 8 annexes. Just going to run you through the key points very quickly. In terms of recommendation, the recommendation is to increase rents by 4%. And there are some sensitivities that have been modelled on that within section 6, particularly in section 6.7. Service charges, we're proposing to increase by 4% for senior living and 4% on heating increases across HRA properties. There is a recommendation for approving fees and increasing fees and charges by 9% in line with inflation. So as I stated, the capital programme is included within the annexes. There's a recommendation to approve that. I also would just like to draw your attention to recommendation 8, which links up to Annex 8, which is to do with delegating the authority to enter into a number of contracts that will need to be procured in 23-24. So running through the report, just to point out that in a standard year since 2015-16, we would increase rent by CPI +1. Given the current climate, that would mean an increase of 11.1% for our tenants in 23-24. During the year, the government has brought in a rent cap of 7%, but due to and in recognition of the current economic situation and to help protect clients, Waverley are proposing 4% increase. Within the business plan, this stays at 4% for 24-25 and back down to 3% throughout the following years. This is modelled in line with our CPI assumptions, which is 2% from 25-26. In terms of fees and charges, just to point out that this does represent the less than 0.05% of our total income. The capital programme is around 9 million, and this year includes an allowance for inflation. The major increases that we see in the capital programme are related to heating upgrades. We require over the next 6 years around £6 million of replacement boilers, and that's the majority of our stock. There will be a stock condition surveys happening over the next 2 years. So the figures in terms of the forward plan may well change in line with what's found within those stock condition surveys. In terms of financing, in 2012, Waverley borrowed around £192 million. These debt repayments start to really ramp up over the next few years. And during the strategic review that was in December of 2022, it was proposed that we would need additional borrowing in order to finance the capital programme, as well as the day-to-day repairs and the debt repayments. In 25-26, we would currently need to borrow an additional 4.5 million. Over the course of the next 12 years, that's 26 million of additional borrowing required based on a 4% rent increase in 23-24. Also included in your annexes are a summary of the variances, as well as a more detailed look at these variances in Annex 3. There is the housing delivery programme. The approved schemes there you should be familiar with. They would have come in front of you in December at council for approval. And there are just some small budgets in there for pre-development works in order for us to start to develop those schemes that might come forward. There is a HRA statement in Annex 7, which just shows you the movements that are forecast in reserves over the next year. That's all I'm going to say on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions? Do you wish to contribute?
Maybe just to add that the executive had a long discussion about the rent levels. And certainly we were at one point kicking around the difference between 4 and 5. And I'm going to, a rare moment here, I'm going to ask if through you, Chair, the committee has itself an opinion on 4 or 5, if it wanted to weigh in.
I think the question which occurred to me was following the clear hint that if we raised them by more, it would severely ease our borrowing profile. And that is the balance. I can understand why 7% could be regarded as too much for many people, but if you depends whether you look at it just as a percentage increase, and 7 seems almost twice as much as 4, or the amount per week it actually costs people. My own feeling, and I'm happy to put this forward for other members to kick around, is that I would think it wise, and I'd like to, this is why I was keen to see what the impact on the borrowing profile was. If you had all the steps, 5, 6, and 7. And if it makes a big difference, then I think it would be worth thinking of the higher number. And the fact the executive was obviously torn between those two is interesting, but not a surprise. So my tendency would be, as I'm concerned about the debt profile, to go for the higher number. But members, what do you think? Martin.
Well, it's a very difficult call, isn't it? I mean, 4 and 5%, I would probably go with the 4. It's like the inflation increases that are included in the general fund, which are up to 9% for lots of the fees and charges where we do have discretion, except I note in sort of rat catchers and wasp things where the percentage increase was kept down. And the council tax as a whole is going up by nearly 3%. where is the right call? But bearing in mind inflation is going up quite substantially. I don't know. I think in the case of our council tax dwellers, I think 4% is probably better than 5% if we can keep it and manage it within the finances. We've had to take quite a big hit in the last few years when the government was making us go with very low increases. This year, they're allowing a very high increase. What will happen next year? We can't catch it up, of course, but I would go with 4%. Thank you.
Egan.
I was going to make a comment about the fact that we're not going for the maximum permitted. Is there any opportunity for advanced lobbying? Because apparently the formula is due to change in 2 years' time. Can we make a case that when I can't remember what it's called, the regulator of social housing be asked to acknowledge those councils who didn't go for the full 7%, so that whatever formula is brought in at that point doesn't preclude some form of more gradual catch up, because that's essentially what we're trying to do, is to level the impact on our tenants.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I'm forced to remember, as Councillor Martin certainly will remember, the years when there was a council tax freeze, which was not mandatory, but you were paid a bribe really by the government not to put up your council tax. And it worried some of us at the time that this was actually a bit of a hostage to fortune, because your council tax base basically went down in real terms, even though inflation in those days was low. And in a sense, you get the same effect if you don't put the rents up now by an extra 1%, if that's what you think is right to do. You never get it back. Your rent base can't be, unless you're going to make us sort of greatly above inflationary hike, which I don't think would be probably regarded as either sensible or fair. So I think it's something you have to grasp now. And I think Councillor Hyman makes a very good point that if we are being seen to do less than the maximum, that is a good thing from that perspective. And it probably gives a bit of scope. Anyway, that's 3 of us who've opined. Councillor Nicholson.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I think you've rather neatly summed it up. I think if we can eliminate borrowing stress fairly significantly, then I would reluctantly go for 5.
Anyone else care to?
Chair, I'd like to speak.
Councillor Edmonds, hello.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that the 4% is unaffordable. And I also make note of the fact that we have a legal obligation to keep under review how much we can afford to borrow. So I would certainly go for 5%. I think if we went for 4%, we would really be handicapping ourselves, regrettable though it may be. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else on this point? Otherwise, if I can, I've got a list of questions, which not very many, in fact, now. They have been answered, many of them.
If I may, on just the issue that Councillor Martin brought up, the issue of fees and charges that haven't gone up, and I think actually those are regulatory or planning.
You have not been invited to speak.
Oh, sorry, I thought that's what you were saying. I do apologise.
You know the situation. You didn't ask in time, so if you do speak,
I did try, but the committee services didn't answer the phone, and the phone system's knackered, and so I had to put an email in, and I did send it off, and it went.
Yes, we know. And I've
So
advised you could always do this at breakfast time. That way, you get in plenty of time.
Yeah, but I do have to work, so it's easy if you're retired, I'm sure, Chairman.
Yes, when you get up, then. Anyway, have you got something very brief that you want to ask?
Well, yes, it's just a matter of, I think last year we had a 600k top up, or I might have got that wrong, it might have been 60, I think it was 600k top up to the pension fund. I know we touched on pension funds, general fund discussion earlier. I just wondered, I couldn't see any figures in there for top ups to the pension fund this year, and can I just have it clear in my brain, please, that from officers, whether or not there is a capital top up of the fund, pension funds, not just for general fund, but for, I'm not talking about pension stress, I'm talking about topping the fund up. We often make a large payment in, and have done over the past few years. Are they saying that we don't have to this year because of the change of circumstances and expected interest rates, or are we actually making contributions for either HRA or GF? Thanks.
Thank you. Right, I think that has been answered, has it not? That actually, one of the few good things about, well, two good things about rising interest rates. One is we earn more interest income. The second is that the present value of the liabilities of pension funds go down, having been increased somewhat artificially over many years of low interest rates. So I think that does answer your question.
Is that an answer from the officers? Sorry, Chairman. Is that an answer that we are not making them? Because I won't look for it otherwise I've got to start looking again.
We did cover this earlier when perhaps you weren't able to join us, which is unfortunate. But yes, I think, Mr. Vickers, you confirm that's the correct position. Good.
Chair.
Right. One thing I did want to ask, going to the annexes. Councillor Seaborne.
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak, Chairman. Just one point of precision in the recommendations relating to the rental increase, and that is recommendation 1 says the rent level for council dwellings be increased by up to 4%. I think I heard Candice say that it would be 4% precisely. Can we have some clarity around that, please? Because obviously the council wants to know whether it's considering a 4% increase or an increase which is made up of maybe some steps of different types of property that have different levels of increase. Some clarity would be useful. Thank you.
So, Candice, can you clarify, or is it a flat 4% currently proposed?
It is actually up to 4%. The reason it's up to 4% is all to do with formula rent. So we have a formula rent calculation that's set by government. And historically, some of our properties might not have been set in line with that. So they won't be able to be increased by the maximum 4% because they'll go over the formula rent cap. So it will be a number. They won't go above 4%, but some of them could be 3%. It's a mix, really, depending on formula rents.
Good. Thank you for that clarification. Could I ask us to look at? Oh, please do.
If I could, sorry, I was concerned at recommendation 3, the recharge for energy costs in the HRA properties, which is on page 162. I mean, everyone's energy costs are going up hugely. I know there is a comment later in the commentary that there will be a service charge review undertaken in the current year. But I think if we feel that energy costs are not being fully recovered by the senior living accommodation, that we should perhaps consider something more in line with what other residents are going to incur at the present time. I did ask Candice for some numbers, and I'm questioning whether these are just energy heating costs or as the full service charge. But it seems from what I was given earlier that the annual income with the 4% increase from our senior living schemes would be 317,000. Whereas the total forecast energy costs for those units next year is almost double that at 595,948. If that is the case, then, you know, one first question, are there any other groups of residents who are receiving that sort of level of subsidy towards their heating costs? Because I don't think it's fair for us to be paying, allowing some residents to a benefit that isn't shared by other residents. And the other question is, have we or have any of our senior living residents gained anything from the energy support packages that are currently in place, but likely to be less generous from April? So I'd like answers to those two questions, and then maybe suggest we are a little less generous to our senior living residents.
Officers.
Yeah, no problem. So just the question 1, can you just confirm the question for question 1?
The first question is the figures that you gave me earlier, where we'd be getting annual income from our senior living schemes of 317,000 in the coming year. Is that really just energy costs, or is that the full service charge cost?
Yeah, that's just the heating charge. It doesn't include the service charge income, which is a separate charge. In terms of question 2, So in the current year, we are getting an energy bill discount. I can't remember exactly what it's called. It does change from April, which is the energy bill discount scheme. So our senior living facilities are around 1% of the properties in the UK that fall outside of what everyone would have known as the £400 rebate scheme that everyone else received. So we are getting a discount on that. I will say it's a very complex scheme, and we've just starting to get some certainty from our supplier in terms of how that translates into money and discounts. In December, for example, I did have a quick look for an example one just to put it into context. One of our schemes, London Court, we would have been charged around 9,000 for that month. And with the discount, it was closer to 6,000. So it's a large discount, but it still brings it into a much higher charge than we would be used to. In terms of looking at this next year, we are waiting for Laser to come back to us with the forecast for the next year. And the reason for holding off slightly was just to bring some certainty to tenants once we do put it up, but that's that increase for the year. The summer charges are much lower and they are more than covered by the current heating charge. It would be the autumn and winter months where we would need to be looking to increase that charge in order to ensure we're getting the costs back in.
I do wonder if members feel that we should perhaps ask the executive to look at this, because if there is really a case that the council is effectively subsidising one relatively small group of residents to the tune of almost £300,000, I just don't think that's fair. And however hard it might seem to say it, I think we should perhaps be looking at more than 4% as an energy cost increase. It's so topical, it can't come as a huge surprise. And I don't think we'll necessarily win any brownie points by delaying at least some element of the inevitable.
So can I ask, are you thinking that the fact that there'll be quite a large pension increase in April of about 10%? So in effect, there's always some element of windfall.
Sorry, I hadn't linked the two things. I was simply looking at a difference of in the order of £300,000 as to what we're paying and what we're recovering, being a form of council subsidy that we're not making available to anyone else.
And could I ask the officers whether they have any figures for what a higher increase of 4%, say 6%, would actually mean in terms of the income that the council received? Would it make a big dent in that £300,000 difference, or wouldn't it make very much difference?
It wouldn't, no. In order to get up to recovery, you would be looking at around an 88% increase to get towards recovery.
Thank you. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think we need to be very careful that whatever subsidy we give, it needs to be fair across all recipients. Thank you.
If I could move us on to item 8, sorry, not item 8, recommendation 8. The one aspect of this which slightly concerns me is that although I have every faith in the Executive Head of Housing and the Section 151 officer, it does seem slightly unusual for there to be no member scrutiny at all, particularly when there's basically an uncapped value to the contracts. It just says over 100,000. And I wonder what fellow members felt. I'd have thought that as we have two co-portfolios for housing, at least one of them should perhaps also be consulted when these contracts are to be entered into. And if you look at the list on Appendix 8, you'll see that some of them are simply put in as over 100,000, and one wonders, in fact, in these inflationary times, if they might end up being a great deal higher. So I would have thought it would be a better form of governance if at least one of the co-portfolio holders for housing was also consulted. I wonder what you think.
I completely agree.
Mr. Chairman,
thank you for that voice from above. Councillor Martin.
Thank you.
I agree too. I think it's a good proposition.
Anybody else?
Agreed.
No. That seems to be one recommendation we can put forward. Right, thank you. Yeah, if we could turn to Annex 3, please, page 177. If you look at inflation impacts relating to 22-23, firstly, can I just clarify that this is basically a guide to how the differences between the budget for the current year and the expected outcome?
It's exactly that. It's relating to the budget and not having a provision available for those items.
Thank you. And so my math suggests that therefore we were expecting the utility costs, I imagine, well, which our senior living operations are a very large part of. They were going to be 307, but they actually rose to 798, roughly to 800,000. We now think they'll go up by a further 85,000. That's the figure in the section E, inflation for the current year, to about 883.
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's comforting. And could you clarify in page 178, there is a reference to mortgage principal repayment, increased cost of debt repayment for 23-24. What is that? Is that simply the scaling up of the repayments, or is it anything else?
Yeah, that's just purely based on the original debt repayment schedule.
Right, and it says partially offset against reduction in debt interest. Is that simply because the capital is being repaid? Is this a fixed rate?
Exactly that, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. That exhausts my questions. Has anyone else got there? And in the spirit of generosity, if you're still there, Councillor Hyman, do you have any further questions?
Sorry, no.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Well, we have been here for almost two and three-quarter hours. I'm minded to summarise these recommendations with the help of the Vice Chair. Are there any others?
No, I think in terms of the recommendations in front of us, we're making comments about, well, are we making comments about more than 4% on energy costs? I don't think the committee expressed a view on that.
I think when we heard just how big the gap is to breaking even, that probably slightly reduced the interest, although I think the one thing that we should add to the point about bringing in a co-portfolio for housing on scrutinising the contracts in item 8, I think given that the leader hinted he'd be quite grateful for some comment, could I just ask, I think we've had at least 4, is it 3 or 4, think that a reconsideration of whether 4 or 5% would be appropriate, but I don't want to make any assumptions on that. I mean, what is the feeling? Do you feel it's something that we should recommend that they revisit it? Particularly the point I hadn't realised before, that there is some credit to be seen to be below the 7% ceiling anyway, and it might have beneficial impacts not just on our borrowing requirements, but on our standing with the regulator.
I would support that recommendation wholeheartedly.
Thank you. What about the rest of the committee who are actually here? Yes. Others? Yep. Okay, thank you. So you've got a second recommendation. Apart from that, are we happy to recommend that the executive look upon the HRA budgets and capital programme with favour? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Well, may I thank you and the officers, all of you, for your attendance and concentration. This is always one of the more detailed, I wouldn't say laborious meetings of the year, but it's one that certainly matters. So thank you all very much indeed.
Chairman, may I indulge you, or if you could indulge me slightly, because you did say that there might be a chance for me to mention something at the very end that we missed at the beginning, and that was that under item 6, your work programme, you don't have the executive forward programme in there in your papers, but tomorrow night's meeting, Services ONS, does have the executive forward programme in there. That has some very useful information, which I don't think your committee would want to miss out on particularly. So you might wish to ask if it can be put into your papers. If you look at tomorrow's, you'll see, for instance, it mentions things like that coming forward for March, in the forward programme is to invite a planning application for the central governing regeneration scheme, that sort of thing. You get to find out what's going on through the forward programme. We don't see it very often, so I just thought I'd leave that one with you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I knew your presence would always be of great value to this committee. I think we can add a recommendation. We would quite like to get the same information as the Services Committee.
It makes the agenda papers longer, I'm afraid, but worthwhile.
Right. Thank you all very much indeed. Shall we add that as a request that we get the same information as our sister committee? Yeah, thank you. And I wish you all a very good night, what is left of it.
Thank you, Chair.